Morning, everyone. Oh, this is a loud mic. It's good. Love this. I want to welcome everyone from the community into our wonderful new space. This space is dear to our hearts, and it's a space that's needed, and it will work wonders for a lot of people now and in the future. There are a lot of elected officials here. This morning, I want to thank everyone for being here, all the elected officials. I'm also an official. I'm the mayor of the Tenderloin, but I'm not appointed, and I have no term limits. So that's a good thing about it. Michael Blecker, our ED, asked me to do the welcoming speech and talk to people this morning. And I asked him, why me? I mean, we got hundreds and hundreds of veterans. And he says, because we looked in our books and found out you use more resources out of here than any veteran altogether. Which I did. I've been a board member here about 12 years. I've been a client 29 years at Swords. I walked in here with some crazy ideas, pushing my shopping cart, and it wasn't filled with groceries. It was filled with my stuff. When I arrived downstairs, I came in here with two crazy ideas. The first one is, man, I want to bring people to the Tenderloin on a walking tour through the most challenged neighborhood in the United States. And they looked at me like I was crazy, because at the time I was a little cray-cray. But since then, I brought 52,000 people to the Tenderloin, who now look at the Tenderloin a lot differently than they did before we started the tour. And as you know, thank you. As you know, this is still the South Tenderloin. Sorry, Rudy. This is the South Tenderloin. So the other idea I had was I wanted to open up a job training program for people who were addicted to substances and living in tents on the city. I wanted to actually teach them coding so they could go to Microsoft, they could go to Twitter, they could go to Airbnb, they can go to Salesforce. And that's been 8 years ago. I'll now have a 99-person staff putting people in jobs in the coding industry and in the tech industry. Now we got thousands of people who were in tents just a few months ago, now living their dreams, now being able to go to Disneyland, now being able to buy homes. And it started right here when they looked at me like I was crazy, but they handed me a check to get started. So I'm very happy to have the speaker here this morning, and we know each other well. I was in D.C. a few years ago, and I had met a friend, and she was taking me around, and she said, let's go to the Capitol building. And she says, who do you know in Washington? I said, no, nobody in Washington. We were going in the Capitol building, and Speaker Pelosi happened to be coming out the door and said, hey, Dale, that's my friend Dale from the Tenderloin. And she says, I thought you said you didn't know. I said, no, I don't know nobody, but I know the speakers. A few years ago, I met this filmmaker named Alejandra. And she wanted me to help her do a documentary film on Mid-Market. And she said her last name was Pelosi. I said, oh, like, because everyone dropped names. You know, everybody's trying to say they're Kardashian or something. And I said, like Nancy Pelosi? She says, yes, I'm her daughter. I said, oh, you have a very famous, powerful mother. She says, no, she has a very famous, powerful daughter. And when she said that, I said, yep, she's a Pelosi, yep. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our ED, and he comes with no introduction because you don't have to introduce this man. This man has put his heart and life into this building. I mean his heart and life into this building. His heart and life in the veterans. And that's a full-time job because we are injured. We made a deal to go over and serve our country and sacrifice everything. But the country did not honor that deal when we came back home. We went over and we stayed in the green tents, and we came back and we turned to red and yellow tents instead. And Source of Plowshares has been working many, many years on changing that. The first housing I had after my addiction cycle was right next door. It's an apartment building right next door. They handed me the keys downstairs in that drop-in. And I went in and fell out on the floor and cried for an hour because I couldn't believe I had keys. the fact that just having keys is one of the most important things we can do for people in the Tenderloin, and we do it here. So, Michael, come on up here, man.
Thanks, Del. Really special, and it does epitomize what our mission really is all about. So I didn't have a name tag on, but John Kecker was good enough to remind me I didn't have a name tag on in his own great way, so I got one. Thanks, John. So look, I want to thank Nancy, of course, for making this so special, right? Wow, you know. There are books, and there will be more books written about the just extraordinary leadership she provided, right, to our whole country. It's sort of like, what's going to happen next? I also want to take a moment to, I've got a lot of, a few notes here. You know, I got to acknowledge folks, right? That's my gig here. So first, some new leadership at Swords to Plowshares. I want to, if you don't know Tremesia Gardner, I think everyone does. Where is the Tremesia? There she is, right there with a little... with a gracious wave of her hand. And she is gracious and special and is like, everybody knows that she's a special talent. And we are so glad, and the vets are so fortunate to have Tremesia working on their behalf. So both John Kecker and Nancy are both on our advisory board, and that's going to help guide us, right? I mean, you know, we're sort of among friends here, friends and community, and that's sort of what this is going to, we're going to try to create that among vets, right? That same warm feeling that we have right now, that's the whole point of this center, right? So vets can come up here, feel safe, safety is good, and feel relaxed and feel they can sort of unwind and sort of talk about what's going on with them and unravel all their layers, and that's what this place is about. But I also want to share those who are going to help us, you know, as advisory board members. I guess I want to, Mark Buell's here. Thank you, Mark. And Jamie Slaughter's here. Thank you, Jamie, so much. Let's see, who else? Charlie Compton is here. The Judge, Honorable Charlie Compton's here, and his wife. Thank you so much. There's so many partners because, as you know, to do anything, you're desperately trying to figure out how do I get resources, right? How do I get anything that will work, right? So the city we work, we work, of course, with the federal government. We work with the state. We work with the private. We work with all the city folk, right? And we work with the private sector. We work with fellow vets in the community. So these things are possible, right? So a couple key city folks are here from the Department of Aging Services. Kelly Dearman, who runs the DOS Department, Cindy Kaufman, both with the Department of Adult Aging Services. Because as you know, right, the veterans we're serving especially are seniors. You know, we serve a certain number of those who served in Vietnam, so obviously they're seniors and they're trying to like deal with all the things that seniors have, right, that going on, right? Issues around their own frailty and mortality and their issues of mental health and everything, right? But what they need is like companionship, camaraderie. And that's what we're going to try to give them with the program here. So we've been a pioneer doing all this drop-in stuff since we started back in /74. And again, this is sort of where they talk about what's mental health. Well, this is mental health, kind of, right? You build a community, you make it super welcoming, right? You structure it in a way, you listen to who's going to be here, you build some support, maybe you build some trust, maybe folks start letting their guard down, and you work with them. You find out what the hell is going on with their life, right? And so folks are so isolated in our housing. We have 500 veterans that we have housed, permanent supportive housing, but many of those sites don't have adequate room. There's not a common room. There's not space, right? They're not a safety zone, so to speak, and that's what this represents. We're going to provide transportation. We're going to have peers here. We're going to be creative and do whatever it takes, right? We're going to have meals. We're going to touch their lives, and that's what this really represents. And again, it just takes everybody doing their work. So that's sort of what this is. It's not that complicated, right? We can all like recognize what we're trying to do here, right? So it's great. Now I'd like to introduce someone special. So I've been to many events with Nancy Pelosi. And, she always says, just as we leave no soldier behind, we shall leave no veteran behind. I've heard that many times. And, with Nancy, it's not just words, it's deeds. And she's been doing the work, right? The city of San Francisco has benefited so much from her recognition of making sure that people who are forgotten are not forgotten and cared for, and the resources come to the city, right? We know that. And that has been a lifesaver for the city. But she's also been there for veterans. You know, she's been helping veterans. She's been trying to protect the VA from it being hollowed out. We don't want the VA hollowed out. It needs to be embraced and robust, because there are veterans who have no place to turn but the VA healthcare system. It's got to be a good healthcare system, and she's determined to protect it. But it's not just that area. She's also really worked hard. Recognize she was very active with the GI Bill. She was very active with the Staff Sergeant Fox Suicide Prevention Grant to recognize that issue. She was very active with the PACT Act, right? We know which deals with the hazards of war and the hazards of serving, right? And it puts responsibility to test, treat, and compensate those who are affected by those hazards. So these are all things that Nancy has stepped up to do. So it's not just words with her, right? It's deeds. And so that's what really matters. So I'd like to welcome Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you all. Good morning, everyone. For me, this is like a family affair, because with Swords to Plowshares, we go back decades. Michael was introduced to me. I met Michael through Art Agnos when Art was mayor, so you know how long ago that was. I was a new member of Congress, and Art wanted to be sure that Swords to Plowshare was high on the agenda of what we had to do. Michael Blecker is a national hero, a hero for in defending our country, but also a hero for our veterans, their health, their everything about them, their economic well-being, and so much more. And I'll talk a little more about it. But first, I want to acknowledge so many friends who are here have been acknowledged. I also want to acknowledge supervisors here. We talked about working with the city. Asha Safai, Asha, thank you for being here this morning as well. And that is an applause line. Okay. So here's the thing. Swords to Plowshare, we met in front of a home decades ago with Art as to how you were going to start providing housing. And over the years into the Presidio, thank you, Mark. Mark's a veteran member of the Presidio board. John Kecker has been the veteran member of the Presidio board, and the manifestation of concern there so important. Today is an important day because it expands so much of all of that. And I want to thank our President, Joe Biden, for his leadership on so much of this. So much of what Michael talked about is about money. And the PACT Act, he has enormous amount of money in this budget for the PACT Act. The PACT Act is, you mentioned it, but this was such a fight that we've had for years. For years, the federal government, our country, has been putting CRAP, I don't even know what else to call it, into these burn pits. All kinds of horrible things, horrible things. And our men and women in uniform had to work around all of that. It was carcinogenic, and they were not getting the attention they deserved. And you know that goes into so much of that we had to pass the burn pit, the PACT Act, keeping our promise to our veterans, but also to do so in a way that they didn't have to prove, and that takes forever. They just had to prove diagnosis and presence, and that is it. And so this was a giant step forward that happened. And again, it's important to do the policy necessary to do the resources. And the first year was like $5 billion. Now the president has $23 billion in his budget. So important. And I say this because it's current with us, because so many of the initiatives that Michael has been involved with have been over time. So you know what he's done: safe, affordable housing, vet-centric health care. And I had the privilege of appointing him to the Commission on Care. I laugh because I knew that he would be Michael when he went there. You know, he would be Michael. I think you appropriately voted against their proposal. Yes, you were proud to do that because he was bringing truth. He was bringing truth, and there were all kinds of other agendas at work. I'm not saying they were bad, they just weren't the best. Michael is always about the best. And so, it's wonderful to be with all of you and to be with Michael. Now, I had 3 minutes, which I've already used up, but I'm not finished yet. I have to talk about Del. Is Del just a force of nature? Isn't he something? He's so wonderful. And by the way, he takes that message all over town. You know, so the pride that he has in what he is doing here and the needs that we know exist. And he's an absolute intellectual resource in addition to a community leader. And that's why you see some, hey, how we doing over there? Takes the hood to save the hood, right? So I saw that you acknowledged him earlier. Okay. But see, here it is. The one-year government funding package in the PACT Act was $21 billion over the year before. I said 18, 21. And then the president's budget is huge compared to before. But we always need more. We always need more. Now, the two things I want to tell you about. One is, and I would say this to our women veterans, you know, for a long time we've been trying to get the language to be, shall we say, more universal in its application. Lincoln, beautifully at the Gettysburg Address, you know what he said, to care for him who shall borne the battle and for his widow and orphan. So beautiful. Who would ever say anything about Lincoln's words? Well, we did because we changed it this Thursday under the leadership of Dennis McDonough, the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs, and he said, to fulfill Lincoln's promise to care for those who have served in our nation's military and for their families, caregivers, and survivors. This is about 2 million women who have served, 600,000 veterans, 50,000 caregivers, 600,000 survivors of deceased veterans. So now it's more universal. And the previous secretary was just saying he wasn't going to change it. There are those in Congress who object to the, shall we say, more appropriate reference to those who have served our country. But nonetheless, on Thursday, Dennis McDonough will make that. Now, some of you know Dennis because when he was the chief of staff to President Obama, he visited San Francisco. He made housing for veterans his priority, and now he's the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. So he has been, shall we say, used to hearing from Michael Blecker on many, many subjects, right?
He walked on our pig count. He came out and spent the night here walking the door of the homeless count. Many years ago, yes, he did.
I'll tell him you said that.
Yeah.
I'll tell him you said that. He'll love that. He'll love that. So in this last round, we were able to get, don't tell me why it wasn't $1 million, $975,000 in federal funding to support this very project. And we're very, very proud of that. Longer hours of service, more nutritious meals, mental health care, legal and professional services, community building activities, like the art therapy and yoga and the rest. And this is again, another way for us to show our respect. Now, Michael said earlier, he's heard us say, and we've all say it all the time, and I'll say it again, on the battlefield, just as on the battlefield, we leave no soldier behind. When they come home, we leave no veteran behind. And that's why we're all so indebted to Michael Blecker for his persistent, determined leadership. I've seen his children grow up in all of this. He has just dedicated his life to all, to our veterans. He is a model for the nation. So it's not just, which is the most important thing, how we meet people's needs personally, individually, community, and the rest. But he has had an impact nationally in terms of public policy and the rest, springing from community care, where we know the best approach to take, and making that a national agenda. Thank you, Michael Blecker, and thank you. And thank you, John Kecker. I know over the years you have been a great supporter of Swords to Plowshares, the biblical call that we have from Swords to Plowshares. Thank you for your leadership, and to all of you as well. So we're going to do one of these. This is a real check, and convey it to Michael Blecker, something like that. Come on, Dell.
Okay.
Michael?
Okay, I have Teresa. Oh, the ribbon.
Right? Yep.
So one thing I didn't do, I want to thank our community partners, because this is a partnership. We're about collaboration, and we got 2 or 3 community partners that we deal with. We got Rudy from United Players, which he's been on this block. How many years? He's just right next door. How many years you been here? 29 years, brother, and he's really doing it. We got Paul from Health Right 360, which is right next door, a wonderful sobering center. And he's an amazing person. Everyone I send to him for a job, he puts them to work. Thank you personally, Paul, for that. We have Judge Crompton from the Superior Court, who is really working with second chance folks, giving people an option to be able to improve their life. And he's done so much for people who are on their last straw. I recently had lunch. He invited me to lunch with him in his courtroom. And when I got there, he says, come on back in my chambers. I said, I'm not going back there. The last time I went into a judge's chamber, I was gone for 3 years. So I said, cool, we'll meet outside. So we're going to go for the ribbon cutting now? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Right here it is.
Okay.
All right.
How do we do this? Okay.
On a count of 3, shall we do
Yeah,
this?
okay. Colleen, you want to tell them what we're doing next? What? Okay.
So we'll do a quick tour, but just for folks who may not be wandering around, just to give you just a brief overview. So in the back there, you'll see some staff offices, and we moved our mail from downstairs on the first floor to the third floor. One of the things that we do a lot here is give out mail to veterans who are using us as an address. And the good thing is that they'll be able to get that mail later because some people work, some people have other commitments. So that will be able to also be extended. Back in the corner is the meditation and library space. In the middle there, you'll see where we're going to do some artwork and movies and a whole lot of things. And then in this area, this is where meals and things like that will take place for veterans to have throughout the week. So just for folks who may miss this quick tour, just to give you at least that quick layout. But we will get started. Great.